It's Rick Liberty at Treaty 10 News, and we're reporting here today. We've connected with Roland Crowe, former chief of the FSIN of Saskatchewan, the Federated Saskatchewan Indigenous Nations, and then it was Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations. So the FSIN that Roland, that you led, has seen a lot of changes, and also our country and our province has tried to make changes, and also the church with the doctrine of discovery. These are changes that are happening and affecting our communities and our indigenous rights. But more importantly, we want to talk about treaty. Treaty is what the foundation of this country was founded on, but it's also the respecting the sovereign nations of the Cree, the Dene, and also the sovereign crown as we look at the British crown that signed the treaty. So, in your perspective, Roland, you have seen all of this transpire, and what are your concerns? And what are the recommendations you'd like to give to our young people? So, treaty in our relationship with our crown and building a nation called Canada. What can we do right now, today, so that we can make it all better?
I think there's a lot of work to do. First of all, our leaders about our treaty and inherent rights. And because of that, I think we're weak. I think we're not organized as we used to be. Kayashish, we used to be really organized to protect treaties and the people. And the thing that I see, Megwatch, is the sales of our lands all over the province, particularly in the north. The province is almost completed. They're selling our 1.5 million acres. The 1.5 million acres. Those 1.5 million acres were supposed to remain in place. If people look at the 1930 transfer agreement, it states very clearly there that we had the rights to hunt, fish, trap, and gather. And it was supposed to be kept until all of the treaty entitlements were fulfilled. But Mo Miigwech, one who the First Nations are. I think what we need to do is to talk about what we are going to do. And I've been working with some of the Senate members and former chiefs, and we've been starting to put together a First Nations Act. And, the provinces went with this Saskatchewan First Act. There's First Nations first. And that's why we want to put together uh, a Saskatchewan First Nations Act. And this afternoon, I'll be talking to one of the vice presidents of the Métis Nation. We pitched one on how we put that together. We still all our brothers and sisters of Pitaushana.
First Nations Act in the province, or this would be at federal jurisdiction.
I think we have to have our own homework done first. I think as we do this in what we call Saskatchewan Miigwech, I think if we do that and other provinces see it, eventually we'll have that across the country. And we can't step too far without having our own homework done. And that you're doing a program like this. Our biggest problem, Miigwech, is we haven't informed our people at the grassroots level and the community levels. And that's why we're struggling. I don't want to go all over the place, but boy, Miigwech, drugs I am drugs may watch in our communities.
Oh boy. Ja, niistä nanu tiigon mä gois bagam skago nant mats when I man
Yeah,
mi drugs in sicha tinia so skot sa mi maski tigon hega kaut nach ko skot pitsupuin in sicha tinia skot it's a
that's right.
poison that they're administering to our children and the addictive strength of this pitsupuin egon magagahtsiptiguto paktsagagahtsiptiguto go goigai man taganatsi and Goed, toch sapatahkoma. Genok taskim no magaitu in treaties, the sovereign nation das kutsumagi o treaty gi masnahina o kinstona o ute taskim no in stamigi tipihtama. Kiwan mas First Nations first gaitu in seutagi kigoatsuigi no. Kapitago pitstogo this colonization world gait kausistiga tigo Europe a skipa pa mi wacht namaso the doctrine of discovery kim masnahigatio ipakni topegan to wash away their sins beyond gatiskagoyako. Mai guigo guesi gotasta ya guig mamitsin umutaga kai mutamin tamamona yako ki sinimnanak skitsuinok the treaties, the sovereign nations igo apihtogussaan kittua maga iwahkuhtua kitsuahkuhtu ma niistä nuopahtiin sulta mä mun tohkahkio again ja nihio atsia että pas pihtaa ja skimno niistä nanottia pihtogussaan skigaituin magi wegi wit no dayanan magi wegi ja skuna mago ja hutta si pissi maga wegian municipal government umutaga ehtago and the ownership of title so ska projekta gitte pihtam nas kunjoma the bank and chimnam our mortgage in anota magi way skin de pihtinan so pro questa tapachtaga the land back bah pihtinina all over the country no esta ho skigawe kiche sinimna na ta patista to tan chimna ko ta matsi to ta ko so Scots commute no maga kawata men ta mamontu ka ta ki wemi na pitos kutsapa tino ma in a Chicago ki wegi Chicago no kaita pihkuhta hegonma.
Well, there's a lot of things that are in our way, but we let them be there. When I was chief of the federation, and I'm not being boastful, I had no fear for white government. While we stumble what our rights were, we stumble how they survived. Lots of times, Moniawak, with all due respect, they wouldn't have survived if it wasn't for our Indian encampments and Métis communities. When they were jumping on the rails from Eastern Canada to come to Western Canada, they always try to find out where there was an Indian encampment or a Métis community. They knew they would get fed the Michichik. And if it wasn't for that kind of Kitmake to win, there wouldn't have been a lot of them settling in Western Canada. And if you look at the book Revenge of the Land, I don't know if anybody has read it, but it was a farm couple around Moscha. They would take off Shanak to the land titles. They would get a deed for a certain piece of land, and then they would take them outside, give them $50, and that person would go select a quarter section of land. And they had a mass arrangement of land, and some way, somehow, the family had some problems. Those grandchildren murdered their grandparents, and they threw one in the well and they buried one of them. And that's why they titled the book Revenge of the Land. we would know what it means, ekipastavchik.
Maggie Siggins pangamasnahak.
That's right.
Yeah, she researched that whole land script. Utigiwit no ipinahnata ko munia script ya hatawi togas pigo gutigo musjo land titles in una no asuna hot utaskimwa. But you mut dogan ma skinde tinya pets gon magapets. The script system was a fraudulent system of land claims, but it happened at the same time as Treaty 10 was being signed up here, 1906. Kimasnega duty Treaty 10 in Sagitawa in Alacross.
Oh, yeah.
And the Métis were offered the script at the same time. So lots of history. Utimina, my wife's traditional land, Sandy Basihatio, Island
Oh,
Farm
yeah.
on the Churchill River. We
Yeah,
still
yeah.
know Taskimwagi Kiwanihta towards a dam. The Hudson's Bay started a dam to power up the Flin
Right.
Flon mine, but somehow there was fraudulent land reallocation or treaty land entitlement. So these stories have to be told, and the truth has to come out. So we're actually talking about these issues that nobody's covered before. But I heard about that Revenge of the Land, and it was that Métis script that was being purchased, and Moose Jaw was Grand Central Station for all of these land purchases or land selections.
The Nikitapon.
Annus kai mutta mahkoma I nuhti pasaguna minuma this First Nations Act. FSIN kitawa pin kwapahtin AFN and the Assembly of First Nations kai mutta mahkoma the FSIN. At that level, kwapahtin mamortuskiakuma, or do you see something a walk to bring in the Inuit, to bring in the Métis Nation we still should some council be, some kind of council should bring all these Section 35 of the Constitution. The reason Roland, during the Royal Commission of Aboriginal Peoples, there was a chapter 2 talked about restructuring, and they mentioned an Aboriginal House of Parliament. It was a First Nations house. Igogutini stagino mamuato skane the member of parliament getting yeksun the pagofpaski. And what I found was the parliamentary library, Iwapahtaman, it's like a stone teepee. Pastigina all those buildings in 1916, everything burnt except that library. Pigona Iguayata stike nogitse. And a third house igitihtamania in that Royal Commission. It was the House of Commons, the Senate, sober second thought, and then a third house, an indigenous house for our nations. That way, Canadian law, all three houses would uphold the law. We in the Supreme Court when we create one country. That was the vision of this Aboriginal House in the Royal Commission. Is that what Kamamtonich Taminamamigotski's a First Nations Act? Doch tapiach in governing our entire country. Me that's no on reserve issues or Métis issues or Inuit issues. As Canadians, we should have a say on the future of our country.
Yeah, if along those lines, if we ever see a change in the political system, which I wish us all a long life, but I don't know if we'll see it, but we should have a percentage of our people that have an allotment of seats in the provincial government and an allotment of seats Kiananpago in the House of Commons. Moya Kutakak to decide who that individual is. Kiananpago. And then that way we'll go forward to the day when we see that we govern ourselves. When Bobby Cameron says that we're sovereign, you have to have a number of things, basically five components to be sovereign. Is based on. You have to have your own laws, your traditions, your currency, and your own land. If you look at our lands on our reserves, 3 million acres that we occupy now, on that land. It's held in trust by the federal crown. So we can't be deemed sovereign. That's a myth they take to Montwinia, and it's always used in elections. We're sovereign. If we're sovereign, why are we giving the province $50 million a year from our casinos? Not any of those casinos. Why the provincial government, and they get $50 million a year. So no, you have to we're sovereign.
In terms of the landscape to Indian, the natural resources transfer agreement, the federal government yaskunamwat to the province, these lands and resources. And then the same thing with the Saskatchewan First Act. There's some resources in the walk.
Right.
Muy nagi oge one ma so Scots. Huta ma mo toskiach das kugai tuin magagawata men kistanotama doch tapia the way swatama matsum no taskim no. Kapita ko pitsetoyak. Tawi tsaya misoyak. Stoputa witse me stand sig kies in the wihtamen de suitaya met muita pigatiskas. Colonialization i gatiska go eftegon muia patsiak muiak suya. Yewan me go takskuniga dan sitte dan sixen stoch dinuan ma dan six stapachtin.
Then kasha keo premier mo. In our turn in today's language is extremely greedy, and they're trampling all over us, make watch, trying to put their acts in place. But when you look at it, the reason they avoid us is because they don't want to be truthful. Like when we signed the agreement in 1992 for treaty land entitlement, it was 117 years they pay Hoyak for TLE, but we finally got it. And when you look at the transfer of this 1.5 million acres, how that happened is the NAFTA agreement. Mexico and the U.S. caused a fuss because PFRA pastures and those crown lands were looked at as subsidies to farmers, and they wouldn't qualify for the NAFTA agreement. So that's why the federal government transferred it to the provinces. They transferred those lands in Manitoba in 1929, 1930 in Saskatchewan, 1931 in Alberta. And that was just to get around the free trade agreement.
Yeah, that free trade agreement, and even sagawin oguti guys mito sakna ona but kiskatahtigun guys ihtagun. The forest products are a big part in the province, dictates where these policies are. But what I understand of the softwood lumber deal is that the U.S. does not like what the Canadian producers and the provinces are doing. So they do a tariff, they do an excise tax at the border. They collect the stumpage fee for us, but the province and the producers are willing to pay the stumpage fee to the U.S. Treasury, but they won't leave it up north. You have rural municipalities, around the municipalities, around the reserves. There's these RMs, and they give themselves a lot of equipment for road, for natural gas, for power, telephone. But up north, the Northern Administrative District, in on fur conservation zones, there on fur blocks, to preserve our resources. But they're starting to dismantle those fur blocks because there's nothing in the act to protect them. And this Crown Lands Act that they had, now this Saskatchewan First Act, what do you see in the north of my? What should the Northerners be doing? Because the land is being sold off. You could go on internet. You could be sitting in Shanghai, China, or London, England, or New York, and you can go online and buy land up north. Before, and like I said, there's no Métis land set aside up north. But our northern crown land. What have you seen changes since you were at the FSIN? A lot of changes has happened, but what made that happen? What's happening that's new now?
From the way I see it, they're not informing us about anything. They don't take our advice. What I'm not being to be to the point and we will never get any place with that kind of thoughts where we think people are superior to us. And what you're doing, Miigwech, is exactly what we have to do, is inform people about what's happening. And we have to have a movement of people right from our own community places and inform them. And once we inform them, they will know and understand, and they will support what we're doing.
We got tigisto if we can mobilize our communities, if they can make it aware, like we have social media, on these little devices, and news happens fast. It's like flashy, but if you can mobilize people with short messages, we need to, I guess, the citizens have to be engaged. The people have to be engaged. The peak squeet, the stuchtachwa. Treaty 10 news, but to go into the communities, in pandemic the visiting people, spreading the word, and letting people know what's happening. A lot of these, like the Saskatchewan First Act, it's like popcorn. They're popping. Scots, their strategy of what they're trying to do is really fast. What would wake up our people to go into this mobilization and seek awareness?
Exactly what you and Chris are doing. That's our only hope. That's why I'm so interested in what you're doing, and with the help of Chris here. I don't know how to say it. I'll say it in my own language. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we have researched this coming together of our nations. I know at the Assembly of First Nations, there's been a confederacy of nations at that level. And then, knowing the history of our the Cree Nation is right across, right to Quebec, different dialects. And the Dene Nation, we saw they're huge going north. And all these different nations, dan sig tichtin, it's the mamon at that nation level tichtin, we saw, as you said, the Métis Nation and the Inuit. It's Kigawa Tinda Mamon with that level?
Mitchell, because just a bit of background on me. When I was going to school, I stayed with my uh, in a place called Maryville, Crooked Lake, right next to the Cowes Reserve. And my mom was a Pitauskwe. So and I'm fortunate. That's why I understand. Not as good as I should, but I understand the Michif, the Apitaushan Bishwin, and the Indian Cree.
Oh.
So my grandparents were Apitaushana, Pelches and Flamas from Maryville, Crooked Lake, Itamik.
Yeah, gonista gawaigawa tin kwakumagana nagakyoutama montotos. Some Putanista our history of our communities with that like Canoe Lake. There was the Indian agent that kicked out the Métis families. Gunan he got called
Right.
Bay, Jans Bay. And in
Yeah.
Dillon, the same thing. The Indian agent kicked out the mixed bloods or whatever they didn't recognize, and they created Michelle Village, St. George's Hill.
Okay. Yeah.
That's our reconciliation dihtin. Kista norma po kwakumagan na nagtapi mamo nito. I was talking to former Chief Wayne Samaganus, and we stamino kumagi maguhe got tanishki my cousins are apihto go sanagita. Muy apihtoto kahkyonya they're full-blooded relatives too. You know, namushumak nokumak tu simagak tap metomi apihtopo tap maok to they're whole.
Okay.
Muy apihtoti isik tap me go kahkyoti mamonto a walk the Scotia. That's good. The Iroquois Confederacy, the great law of peace. When you study the nations coming together, it's for a greater purpose. You're going to get peace. We talk the Mohawk, the Onondaga, the Tuscarora, the Seneca. Those are the nations. The Japanese. Kyoto Monto. The wichita from our country to make it better.
The biggest issue right now on that is the government divides us. It isn't us that divide each other. And they will always put laws and policies in place to cause fights among us so we become weak and they take us out one at a time. They're great for dividing communities. They're great for dividing peoples. And that's one of our biggest issues that we have to face. And I have relatives, they're not treaty. And there's no difference between me and them. But the government determined they were not treaty.
Yeah.
We determine what treaty is and what our nations are and what our citizenship is. We a federal government.
Yeah, those are the hangover of colonialization. It's so we cannot know a brighter future. We have to throw back those colonial practices. And as you said, our leaders have to stand in pretty well two worlds. You have to have an indigenous worldview. You got this modern worldview. It's like you have to respect the old traditions. Your sovereignty guy doing guy muta minoma nihioatsu and Iwanmamina puta sukin stuchtigati and respected, and there's not only rights, it's responsibilities. That's who guy to hunting. I'll give you a story. There's a treaty hunter that he was driving on the road. There's no road corridor, so the moose are open season. He shot a moose with his wife, just proud. I drove up on him and I gave him a hand, and he was just proud. And then I came back. I had to go to work in another town, and I came back to where he was. When I found him, he was just dejected. Here, what had happened was the resource officer had drove by, and he looked at the hunter. It was all legitimate. He killed the moose legally, but the resource officer interpreted the shooting of the moose that he shot it from the road. Nobody around. This is a northern road, no traffic, nothing. He did everything right. He's hunted moose for years safely. But the resource officer said the shell casing was on the highway, and he charged him with unsafe use of a firearm. So he used another law, not your indigenous right to hunt law. He wasn't challenging that, but the use of the firearm, and that effect on that hunter. He didn't even want to challenge it legally. So it deflated his mamihitsuin and magagiwa pahtamanin. So tansik stapahtinwan in when laws are being inflicted on us, and our laws, we don't make them, but they interpret the laws the way they want.
Yeah, that's why when we were fighting for tree land entitlement, I had my ups and downs, and some people felt that we should have went to court. I don't have enough trust in the white court system to put my future, my nation's future, in their hands. I don't know how you say I don't trust them, but that's why we went the political route, and the fact that we had all our documents in place. And I say in all due respect, Ogamakano make watch Kushtamuk the government because of money. Kostachawak, to say the real truth, that they're stealing our lands and our resources because they won't have their salaries to live on if they get cut from the government's funding. Mitani Kostachawak.
Yeah, that reminds me of a story with William Commanda, an elder in Maniwaki, when I guess the federal government started giving grants to the nations. He stepped down as chief, saying, "I cannot accept the crown's money for me to survive. The people have always given me the support to be the leader." But once they started giving money from Indian Affairs to them, he stepped down as the hereditary chief, and he said, "No, I can't accept that money. It's not proper." That was William Commanda way back in the 1960s. He made that move, and it's still true today. You're saying it's like bait. They use money to get you hooked on, contribution agreements, and if you don't toe the line, they're ready to pull that money back. And so that's what you're saying about money transfers is so true today. A lot of our people are expecting a budget, but if they don't get it, it's either because of their financial situation. A lot of people went into third-party management. Same thing with our little villages up here, the provincial villages. During the pandemic, they had pandemic help money for all the communities, but you had to have your financial books in order. So a lot of our communities missed out because they didn't have the audited statements. They weren't allowed to receive any more money until the audited statements were put in. So money is it's a trap sometimes, and we got to be careful of what we're giving up to accept those money or the money transfers.
What?
Just going back to that issue of funding, Roland, Indigenous Service Canada, it used to be Indian Affairs. They're kind of switching the departments a bit. what do you see at that federal level that what changes should be made to make it proper? I know they're splitting the department between Northern Affairs and Indigenous Affairs, but at administering us from Indian Affairs, what's wrong in that area, and what could we do to make it better?
If they're serious, they should be funding the Department of Indian Affairs, Northern Development, and all the departments should be contributing their money to that. Like they have their money scattered all over the place, but sometimes we don't have access to it or we don't know how to have access to it. But there's millions and literally billions that's being uh, out there under the title of Indian Aboriginal or whatever, but other organizations are grabbing those dollars. And until we have what would be called a one agency, which would gather all those different department money allocations and given to us as I don't often use the term First Nations. First Nations, I think I'm a treaty status Indian. And we would have access to that. Like I haven't looked at numbers lately, but I know in the days when I was chief, there was $1 million a day that was being spent by the province on what they called Indian Aboriginal issues. And I think it's close to $2 million a day now that the provincial government gets from the federal government. But we don't see it. The province determines how to spend that, and they don't spend it on us. We well, good. They're using that money on. That's our money on what used to be EPF payments, established program funding, and now I think they call it a social envelope. They give that money to the province, boy, cannot. Like, what's wrong with that money going to our Indian bands, our communities, and the Métis communities? The province is using us as an industry so they can hire more people. And the reason they never solve a problem, because if they solve a problem, we don't need them anymore. This is a side issue, but I'll tell you, I worked as a guard at the jail in my young days, and there was this young Indian guy getting out of jail, and I said to him, Daryl, I hope I see you soon, but not in here. And he said, okay, yeah, we'll see you. And 5 minutes later, I got a call upstairs, and my supervisor was there, the warden was there, and the union rep. And I said, what's this all about? They said, we're going to tell you something, Crowe. If you keep discouraging these guys from coming back here, you and I are not going to have a job.
Wow.
Oh boy. Well, I went it by in my thoughts,
No,
but that's an example of how they exist.
no, I seen a similar experience with my son. He was applying for a corrections job, and it was just driving prisoners from the
Yeah.
institution to the hospital. But when they discovered that he was an indigenous person, they said, no, we can't have anybody like that drive these people. You might help them, and then in other words, like you're suspicious, Simagi Machi team going,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's their own industry. They're protecting their industries, like you're saying.
Oh, Mittani.
Yeah, it
And
was.
you go ahead.
I was going to say, again, as part of these social issues and the corporate, quasi economy, in the farming world, uh, I was part of the the Prime Minister's Agriculture Committee one time, and a senator from the province, the late senator here, had mentioned that in the province of Saskatchewan, the future looks like this, he said. He said it's going to be a corporate farming industry. There's going to be huge tracts of land owned by corporations. It's not a family farm anymore. And yet, in my mind, I always thought families would be running the farms. But he said it's very corporate. What do you see, Miigwech, with the 2023 in your farming communities in your region? Uh, is the corporate farm, the industrial farm taking over, or is the family farm still strong?
I'd say about 85% of it is corporate farms. Uh, some of them are farming 15, 20, 30, 40,000 acres. And they're weeding out all the smaller farmers. I remember growing up, there was a house almost on every corner in rural Saskatchewan, especially out here, and now that's gone.
The other thing that I've seen, I sit on the school board as well, and a lot of farm communities had their own school boards. So they paid taxes and you're, representing the taxpayer. The school boards were elected, but this province has got rid of the taxation for the school boards. We don't do a school levy. The province collects all of this. So it looks like it's going back instead of building capacity, the way the farmers built their own communities, their own economy, their own schools, their own towns. But now with this corporate, I guess, involvement in the farming, those small communities are dwindling, but they're also changing the governance of those communities. Especially in the schools, they got rid of the taxation, and it looks the way the province looks like they want to get rid of elected school boards as well. You could hear it. The right wing government in Manitoba tried to do it, so it seems like they're attacking democracy. To look at how the community can build itself up. They want total control. To me, it's called it risk management. No, the province views indigenous title as risk management. So that whole governance and development of the North, and it's got me worried, Roland. It's I don't know. The changes I see are not for the better; they're for the worse, and I hear that in your voice as well. What you're observing. So maybe in what's on your mind? What's in closing? I guess Tansik Stapahtingia.
I see that we have lost ground big time as Indian, Aboriginal, all the different tribes, the uh, the Aboriginal groups. I see the province being greedy and grabbing everything. I see them trying to amalgamate our school systems with theirs. Once we do that, we've lost control of the curriculum. We've lost control of everything. And our only hope is what you and Chris are helping to make change for the betterment and the involvement of all of us as individuals, but yet collectively at a larger group. That is our only hope, Wagamaka.
Wewan makaimutamah ka ispin tanihio pik squini gotan sik kai taug tussim nigano kaitis kagani tauget kapitsasta muhti taug tussim nanak tanihio atsumustavetan siteiskoyata ja mahtisa nihio atotta atsumustavak tussim dan sit teisip matsetat nigan.
Oh, no, no, say, Mitanewi Ayaman Oma Kirwishis. Mitanita Shohetemoyan. Muya awiak to shock to shock to think they're better than you. Uh, uh, Mittany to work hard, uh, to not be greedy, and to mutate and get maki to win to I Mittany get maki to win miashin.
Roland, we give me us and got beat some win. We spin ya bits that the noch the big squan, Buguispi. Tap do my camera is always available. My the stories that we hear, those are in my view communications. The big screen, that's how we heal our nations. That's how we heal. That's our medicine for healing amongst nations, healing our people. We take medicines as an individual, but our words, our stories, our messages, those are medicine for our nation's healing. And Canada needs healing because it's been hurt. Our sovereign Indigenous nations have been hurt, but we want to make a correct trail. As you said, our grandchildren are coming, and the gifts that we provide for them and the path we provide for them is our responsibility. And today, Roland, I'm honored as former chief and also the Senate, the Indigenous Senate of the FSIN. Your work is very critical, but your perspective is the strength that we need. We need to see where we need to go and understand the dangers as we move forward. Ninaskamon.
Nistamenin naskumit now Chris we sa naskamo e be we het nast. Mittany mioite. Mar
Well,
sé chu dat gitwa.
yeah, the top wimuin, telling the
Yeah.
truth and our perspectives. It may be different. People might not like what we have to say, but in telling the truth, we provide a path and a solid foundation for our children to make decisions in their journeys into the future. So I thank you, Roland, for joining us today. This is Treaty 10 News that provides opportunities for people from all across the country to share their point of view. But we want to hear and we also want to see how life can continue into the future with the knowledge that we have and the beauty that we have. This is a beautiful country that we have to hold together, but we have to guide the people that have been misguided to us. A lot of this colonial government and has been a misguided effort for power, for land, for resources, for riches. But how do we go forward now living together, respecting each other's families, and also governing together? It's not somebody governing us. We have to govern together.
Itapuan. Mittany naskumun mistamina.
Thank you very much. This is Rick Liberty, Treaty 10 News, reporting in northern Saskatchewan and talking to Roland way down in Regina. And we thank you, Roland Crowe, and we wish you the very best, especially this time of the year where seeding and planting for the farming world is critical, and the gardens providing life and food for our families is an age-old responsibility, but I'm glad you're still continuing that tradition.
Gitawamina.
Egose.
Egse. Gita.
That way.